Study with Steph, cause she's the best. She's gonna help you get your CTS, yeah.
Ain't nothing can keep me down.
Stephanie.
Hey everybody, welcome to Study with Steph. We are on episode 5 now, so if you are still with me, congrats, thanks. I am joined today by Chrissy Sara. She is the Midwest Sales Support Engineer for Sony's Pro Division, and today she is going to help me start with the video systems chapter. That's chapter 5 if you're studying in the AVIXA guide. But before I can understand video systems, I wanted Chrissy to help me understand light, because light is where all of this starts, if I'm correct.
Yep. And I'm pretty excited about this chapter. It's like my favorite chapter in the whole book. So
I'm really glad
Rightly
that you're
so,
the
right?
person. Yes, I'm so glad that you're the person I'm talking to then, because I was like going through this. I was like, what's going on? Somebody please help me.
Yep,
I'm really glad
not
you're
a
here
worry,
with me.
not a worry.
And I'm glad you're going to make this experience a little less daunting for me. So I really appreciate you being here. And you came prepared. You came with a whole presentation. So
Yeah, I'm ready, man. I'm excited.
Okay, awesome. Whenever you want to start, let's learn.
Cool. So one thing I wanted to encourage you to do is,
Okay.
stop me at any point that I say a word that you don't get, or, that you want to go in more depth of,
Okay.
so that we make sure we get the lesson. And then, outside of this, this book is exactly that, is an exam guide. So the lessons in here are a review of, important concepts. One thing I really like is the AVIXA Online Essentials of AV course. They break down these elements in more detail. And then, you can just kind of spend your own time learning about the subject. But anyways, so let's start with light itself, like the actual essence of light.
Yeah.
Understanding some of the concepts in this book and in our CTS journey requires a basic knowledge of physics. And I have tried to disprove this theory, but it's just impossible. So when we think of physics, we think a science course that we may or may not have taken in high school, right? Well, there's a lot of other people in this industry who did take physics, and it does sit in the back of their mind, and it is how they subconsciously think through things, like, how planes take off. Or for me, a lot of times I'll catch myself lost at a stop sign because I'll have stopped at the stop sign, and then all of a sudden everything just goes on pause because I'm starting to think, wow, like, what are all of these molecules doing? Like my car tire versus the pavement, and like the stop sign is red. Why is the stop sign red? Like, I just get this, like, almost immediately I get super in depth about the silliest things. But that's important, because why is that? Why if I press my car horn, where does that sound go to? And why can I hear that, a mile away? Which car is going to hear me first? All of those things that we don't even think about on a day-to-day basis is physics. So I asked you to bring something today, and I wanted you to show us what it was I had you bring. So go ahead and show us, and we're going to come back to it later in the lesson as well.
I came to class with the approved materials. I have a glass of water and a pencil.
Okay, so on camera, put that pencil in the glass of water.
Okay.
Yep, just like that. So now you can see, if you see the top part of the pencil is a little bit off center than the part of the pencil that's in the water.
Yes.
Right? Okay,
yes.
So let's take a note on that. Go ahead and put that down. Thank you.
Okay, great.
That visual, how does that happen, right? So why is the pencil almost disjoined from itself? We're going to get into why that is. I already mentioned a little bit about people in this industry that know a little bit about physics and either went to a course or didn't go. If you did or didn't, I would still recommend doing a refresher of like Physics 101. And you can find this anywhere online. LinkedIn Linda has one, Khan Academy has one. There's probably some physics guru who does a basic version of it, but basically what that has helped me do in my CTS journey is answer all of those questions. Like when I see a term in here, especially on the audio section, like, you know, something about a decibel, what in the world is that? And how do I associate that with anything else in the AV world? Turns out decibels everywhere. So it's just, it's worth taking a couple minutes to learn, you know, some of the basic elements. And one of those basic elements is light itself. One thing that I also took note in my learning for my CTS was, after studying the chapter in audio, you know, until my eyes were bleeding, I realized that audio and light are very similar. You know, with the idea of wavelength and frequency and amplitude, I was like, wait a minute, audio also has wavelength, frequency, and amplitude. So can they exist or coexist? Do they? Do you remember from your previous lessons the definitions of wavelength, frequency, and amplitude?
Yes. I mean, if I tell it off the top of my head, it's not going to sound scientifically correct.
I would definitely encourage, what do you call those things? Flashcards, because wavelength, frequency, and amplitude are the elements that we consider to give us a result of something. And when you get further along in your CTS journey, you're going to run into power, and you're going to run into Ohm's law. And Ohm's law has also 3 elements that we have to consider to give us a result. So this is fundamental stuff that you're learning right now, is wavelength, frequency, and amplitude, 3 elements that give us a result. And that will later also show up in power, where we have 3 elements, volts, amps, and ohms, that gives us a result of power. So keep that in mind as you learn as well. So
wait, I just remembered what wavelength is. Wavelength is like one rotation, one full rotation, right? Okay.
Yeah, basically.
Yes.
It's the physical distance between the 2 points. So if you think about, you know, exactly one cycle apart, I like to use the example of like a racetrack. You know, if you go around once and you come around to that other point.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so wavelength, I think the official definition is like the physical distance between 2 points, exactly peak to peak or something like that. But it's exactly where we're going, one cycle apart. And then frequency is how many of those are in a given cycle, right?
Okay.
And then amplitude is the intensity. So the way that I understand how light and audio run parallel with each other, this is going to make a lot of sense here in a second, is, you know, if somebody who is in their entire career of audio versus someone who's in their entire career in video, we'll probably nitpick this comparison, but we use wavelength, frequency, and amplitude affects light movement, as in light color and light intensity. And then wavelength, frequency, and amplitude in sound gives us our tone and our intensity. So wavelength speaks to the spectrum, right? So wavelength speaks to where we fall on either the visible spectrum or the audible spectrum. And then frequency in light gives us our color, and then audio gives us our tone. Amplitude then gives us our volume, and then in light, amplitude gives us our brightness. Does that make sense? Okay. So I also enjoy thinking about light in its motion, because in all that we think about in our existence, believe it or not, is very theory-based. So though we have substantial evidence to lean towards proving something one way or the other, right, white or black, it still is a general theory. If you go back way into the history of really smart dudes, they have a lot of theories, and some theories are more proven than others, or we lean more towards others than another because of various elements. So like if we think about the psychology field and how all the ways that we can, think about how our brains work, that's all theory based as well. Some are more useful, or I don't want to say useful, but more result orientated, and then others are just present. So a way I understand how light can move is first to understand the two possible theories that exist. One of it is it is made of waves of electromagnetic radiation. Say that 5 times fast. So how light can move is waves of electromagnetic radiation, or streams of particles called photons, but don't worry about that. So there's two theories of how light moves. Now, why are there two theories? Because really smart dudes back in the day who studied this not only saw one way that light can travel, but they saw another. And if you blend the two, you get different results. So some ways to understand elements of light are better understood thinking in one theory, and other elements of light are better understood if you think in another theory. But it's still the same thing. It's still either in this context, light direction, or in the psychological theory aspect, how our brain works. So it's still the same thing. It's just thought of in two different ways. So don't get too lost in the weeds when you think there's not two ways to drive a car. Well, there actually is. We just prefer one over the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
All
sense.
right.
So like they coexist, these two theories. That's not like you have to believe one and not the other.
Right. Or you're less of a technician because you follow one path or the other. It's just an agreed upon path to consider our light in our field. Okay, so let's review wavelength, frequency, and amplitude one more time, since we have that background now.
Okay.
Wavelength is the physical distance between the 2 points, and here I have it exactly one cycle apart in the waveform, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about that in light, do you remember an acronym from like 9th grade or whatever? Maybe it was like 4th grade. I don't remember school anymore. Do you remember what that was?
No. What was it?
I think somebody mentioned pizza one time, but it's Roy G. Biv. Do you remember Roy G. Biv?
Yes, Roy G. Biv. I know her. Mm-hmm.
All right. So that is our acronym to describe the visible portions of the entire spectrum of light, visible to our eye. And in hearing, we also have a spectrum. Have you ever heard that our dogs can hear higher pitches than us?
Yes.
Well, we have X-ray machines that can see higher frequency of light, right?
Yes.
That we can't see.
Because X-ray waves are like all the way over here. Or over here.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay.
So in the spectrum of frequency life, our spectrum of human hearing is 20 to 20,000 hertz. So just like we have a visual spectrum, that cute little, graphic that shows us the rainbow, we also have that in hearing. That's another reason why I like to use the example of light and audio.
Yes.
So now our frequency, you remember what frequency is?
Yes. It's how many of these you have.
Yep, cycles in that waveform. You got it.
Some scientist is gonna like cry if they hear me trying to explain this.
Well, hopefully the smart ones will be like, these chicks are finally getting it.
True.
So in frequency, in light, that gives us our color. So purple, blue, green, etc. In audio, it gives us our tone.
Okay.
For amplitude, it being our intensity of the wavelength from the center line, right? Do you remember what that gives us in audio?
How loud, right?
Yep, you got it.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Got it.
Okay. So to foreshadow our inverse square law discussion, wavelength and frequency is inversely proportional.
Okay.
So normally, if you've never heard that word before, the first thing we're going to do is look up the root word of inversely.
Okay.
So the definition of inverse is in reverse order of.
Okay.
So if we go back to wavelength and frequency is inversely proportional, we can say wavelength and frequency is reverse order of proportionally, which shakes out, if you wrote it down, if one side gets bigger, the other side gets smaller.
Right. And in math, it's like when you think of inverses, it's like if it's 25 or 25 over 1, the inverse is 1 over 25.
You got it.
So yes,
got so keep that in the back of our heads. Yep, cool. Keep that in our back of our heads when we get to that. Every time you think of the word inverse or see it, or inversely or inverse square law, that's what we're talking about. Okay, so if we think about that and apply that to our visual spectrum of light, we have our red is probably going to be our lows, right? Because we have a long wavelength and a short frequency, or I should say a low frequency. So long wavelength, low frequency. Our blues and our purples is short wavelength, high frequency.
High frequency. Got it.
Which, remember, your visual write-out of frequency is the number of cycles, so it's like
yeah
instead of woo. Yeah.
For red, yes.
Got it.
Okay, cool.
All right, questions so far?
I think I'm with you.
I feel like you are, so I'm excited. All right.
I'm excited too. Then. I'm like, wow, maybe I'm not as stupid as I thought.
All right. So why do you think we only see that little section of the spectrum of light?
Is it kind of for the same reason that we can't hear above 20,000? Is it just like it exists and it's just at such a high or such a low rate that it's just like our puny little human eyes or ears just like can't comprehend it?
You absolutely got it. You nailed it on the head.
Great.
What we're going to do is translate that into technical speak.
Fair enough.
But you totally got the concept, and that's what I wanted. Okay, so on that spectrum, right, those colors and those other things that we can't see are made up of those different frequencies, right? Yes. So if I was to look at red to violet, I would see that red is what? What is that, a long wavelength? Yeah, red is the long wavelength, and then violet's that shorter wavelength. And then the frequencies would be different. So if I go a frequency above that violet, my eyeballs can't see that very well. And if I go frequency below red, my eyeballs can't see that. I'm sure there's some animal like an eagle or something that could probably see outside of the visual spectrum, but I'm not an eagle, so I don't know. So anyways, light is a form of that energy that coexists and interchanges with that matter. So our eyeballs can only pick up those certain wavelengths and frequency, and everything else on that spectrum falls out of that range. So another big element in understanding the visual spectrum of light is one of my favorite topics, and there are people in this world whose entire professional careers are on this topic, and that topic is color.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When you were a kid, did you take all the crayons out of your crayon box and use every single one of them just to see what they would look like?
Yes.
I totally did the same thing. I also used those Scenty markers. That was my jam.
What were those called? Mr. Scent or something? Mr.
I don't even remember. But I was totally the kid that was like sniffing the markers and then sniffing the Sharpies. I was totally that kid because I just couldn't not.
My parents told me I wasn't allowed to sniff Sharpies because they said that would make me stupid. So I just
Nope.
I stayed away from that.
My parents didn't care, and now I work in video processing. So here we are.
I know. Maybe I should have sniffed a few more. It would have made me more intelligent.
There you go. You never know. Piquing the curiosity, that's the key. So I could probably talk about color for a week, but I tried to summarize what I wanted to point out for this particular lesson for you in a short little thing. So let's try this out.
Okay.
So my color is a friend to me, and the reason it is because it's an interpretation of those wavelengths and frequencies. Have you ever met anybody who's colorblind?
Yes.
I have as well. I actually have a family member who's colorblind. That just means that their eyeball is missing the ability to interpret that particular wavelength and frequency of whatever they're seeing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's still light. It's just our interpretation of it. Out in the horse pasture, I got 3 horses with 3 different colors. And I can appreciate the fact that they have 3 different colors because I can interpret the wavelength of light that I'm seeing. So I take my vision for granted because I don't think about it. I mean, if I looked at my desk right now, I have Carl, I have my little Minecraft minions, I have 3 different color sticky notes and all this other stuff that helps me get through my day. You know, orange is social media, purple is video, blah, 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 blah. So I totally take my vision for granted. And a lot of times I don't even realize what it is that I'm looking at, right? So the more that I learn about how my eyes are seeing and taking in color and all day, every day, what I do with it in our industry is fascinating. So I have a gajillion cameras here because I demo all the Sony gear all the time, right? This camera is going to perceive color differently than this camera, and then whatever monitor I see that on is also going to be different because that monitor has different color parameters. So there's a lot of things to consider. Either way, I'm thankful for my eyeballs. Have you ever heard in cameras, monitors, LEDs, anywhere, the term red, green, blue?
Yes.
Okay. RGB, you know,
yes.
There's been lots of jokes made. Have you ever thought about what the red, the green, the blue has to do with?
It's like the colors of the pixels.
Sure. Yes. That's great.
That was like that was a total guess. So
yeah.
Great.
So we can talk about pixels another time.
Okay.
But you've hit on a great point. And so a pixel is made up of those 3 colors, right? Okay, so those 3, I'm making a little, ignore my fingers. I'm making a little pixel with my fingers here.
Okay.
Red, green, blue. Why those 3 colors and not any of the other colors on the visual spectrum? Because our eyeballs' 3 most sensitive detectors is for red, green, and blue. That's how we perceive color.
Oh, okay.
So all the combinations of color that we see, like this teal, this purple, fidget spinner thing, Carl, right? That's our combinations of that red, green, blue, giving us our perception of this color purple. And we have Mr. Sir Isaac Newton to thank for this.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Have you ever seen the album cover? I'm sure you've probably seen it on shirts and stuff of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you know, like there's that little prism and then a beam goes in and comes back out.
Uh-huh.
So they're using a dispersive prism to do that. And part of that comes from Isaac Newton's old, lessons where he took some prisms and proved that white light is a combination of spectrum of colors by shining it onto those prisms and outputting it the same.
Oh,
And that's how we have our whole visual spectrum.
Okay.
You know, when you look at a red apple, we always think when we see a red apple, we're seeing red, the color of red, right?
Yeah.
Have you heard of this example being used in explaining how we see light or perceive light before?
No.
Okay, so this will help explain why the joke I just mentioned was so funny.
Okay.
And here's what we're looking at. I wish I had a red apple. Pretend this is a red apple, okay?
Okay.
So the technical understanding is that we perceive that this object as is red because when the white light hits it, this object is reflecting some of those wavelengths in the visual color spectrum, but not all of them. And the ones that are missing and the ones present give us that color combination that we call red.
Okay.
So when we talked about this a little before this lesson, you mentioned, why on earth do we see the colors that we see?
Yeah.
Well, technically, these items, I don't necessarily want to say that they're colorless because that's not technically true, but it'll at least drive home my point that the colors that we see are combinations of the lack thereof or presently frequency of color, which is why apples are red and this is purple and black is not actually a color. So one thing that I really like with the training materials available to us for our CTS, if you just stay focused on the CTS available material, is the outline of the concepts is a high view. If you're wanting to get more in depth, go for the D, because the CTSD helps us understand why we are doing what we're doing. The concepts that we just reviewed, the ones about color and why we can see what we see and being frequency based, that's all base knowledge. But why do we need to know all that stuff for the CTS? Why do we need to know all that stuff for our industry and the various areas of our industry? Is all, I don't want to say relative, but it's like, you know, if I'm in sales, how does this affect me? If I'm in integration, how does this affect me? If I'm in live events, how does this affect me? So for you studying the CTS, try to put yourself in each of those person's shoes. And that might help you click with some of these concepts. In the audio world, you know, would you go back to a concert if you couldn't hear the singer properly?
Heck no.
Probably not. Yeah. Or have you ever been to like a live singer at a bar and you're like, the speaker is just blasting and you can't even think straight and you don't even remember what you ordered because it's so loud?
Yes.
Like that production quality is terrible. If the guy would have just measured, then we would have been fine. So so measuring light and measuring audio is key to many, many areas of the industry. But in our example of a lighting director at a concert or a guy singing at a bar, we want to make sure that we're producing proper results. And that's why we care about measuring light. Do you have, I'm assuming you obviously live in some form of house, like an apartment or a house, right?
Yeah, I live in an apartment.
Okay. Do you have like light in your bathroom?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have one of those lights that are like the 3 bulbs, or do you have like one that's just like a ceiling thing?
Like the 3 bulbs.
Okay. Have you ever had one of those bulbs go out?
Yeah.
And you walk in your bathroom, you turn your light switch on, and you're like, all of a sudden I can't see myself, or I see myself significantly less than I did the day before. So that psychological awareness that something has changed is key to making sure your light is properly measured. Why do I say that? If you were putting your makeup on in a bathroom that had half the light it did yesterday, you would be getting frustrated.
Yeah.
You would probably not do your makeup as well because you're angry and your face is all scrunchy, and you also can't see where you're putting your mascara, right?
Yeah.
So if I had the incorrect light measuring, say in a classroom, my students are going to be angry by the end of the day because they're squinting to write their notes,
Yeah.
or they can't see me at the front of the classroom, right?
Yeah.
So that's where measuring light and the importance of making sure light is at its best comes into play in the CTS world, because you want to make sure that the experience, not just the mathematical part, but also the experience the person is having is going to be productive. You're going to walk out of your bathroom with a nice makeup face. So before we get into that, the idea of measuring light with instruments and the mathematical part, we have to talk about 5 properties of light. The 5 properties of light I'm referring to, you've probably heard of a few.
Mm-hmm.
Reflection, refraction, dispersion, scattering, and absorption. Have you heard of those before?
I have.
Okay. So these are what more terms that you want to put on a flashcard for yourself. You know, I don't know, nobody knows what's on the test, and we're not allowed to talk about it if we do. So,
Right.
you know, if you run into a question where you're asked what the definition of X, it's going to be one of these 5, right? These behaviors of light. So if we were to walk through the definition of reflection, we can pretty much, you know, it says it in its name. If I look in the mirror, I see my own reflection. So this would be defined as light bouncing off of the surface it is striking.
Yes.
Okay. Refraction, in this context, do you have your cup again with your pencil?
Yeah.
Let's see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So refraction is the light changing direction as it passes through a medium. In this particular medium, we have the air and the water, right?
Yeah. Yes.
That the disconnection of the pencil is refraction. You're witnessing refraction right now with your eyeballs.
Oh.
And how that is measured is comparing the capacity of air to hold the pencil and the capacity of water to hold the pencil. Water is thicker than air, kind of sort of roughly. So
Yeah.
if I have that pencil in air, I see it in one state. I put it in a new medium, I see it in another state. That's refraction.
Got you. Okay. That makes sense.
Cool. Good job.
Thanks.
So dispersion, I can never say any of these right, so just bear with me. Dispersion goes back to our Pink Floyd analogy.
Okay.
Right. You got one beam of light, boom, and then it just makes this beautiful cast of light in all of its colors.
Yes.
Yep, just a nice, even beauty. I actually thought about getting a tattoo of Pink Floyd's prism just because I love it. It has so much meaning, but we'll see. I probably can't if I'm going to go for my CTSD because they'll kick me out of the testing thing.
Just get it like on your back or somewhere you can't like turn and like look at it.
That'd be so funny. Oh man. All right. So then we have 2 left.
Make
Scattering.
you tape a paper over it or something.
I'd put gaff tape over it and be like, oh man. I would probably be friends with the test taker lady just for that joke and be like, hey, remember that time?
Like, it probably honestly wouldn't be the weirdest thing they've seen either.
True.
I just like feel like
funny.
they've seen some things. I get that vibe.
They've probably seen it all. Yeah, and they're like the kindest people in those test centers too. They're just
Yeah.
like, da da da, like, yep, you're gonna go and take a test. If you fail, oh well.
Yeah, like it's okay.
Yep.
Anyway, sorry, I
All
got
right,
you
so
off
we have,
track.
that's okay. I started thinking about Pearson view. So we got two other behaviors of light to talk about. One is scattering,
Mm-hmm.
which is just as it sounds, hitting a surface and then going off in all different directions, which is why I have this blingy background on my work phone. I love it when it's in my car on the magnetic strip thing, and the sun hits it and the inside of my car is all sparkly.
Yeah.
Which technically you could what's the term I'm looking for? Contest that, because technically these are little plastic diamonds and it's dispersing. But this is the kind of conversations you have with talking about the behavior of light.
Yeah.
If my light is hitting this, it's more of like a rough surface. Like I'm thinking about the ice, weird things that are outside because it's fluctuating temperature and the snow is melting. Like there's a ice, I don't know, it's not an icicle because it doesn't look like an icicle, but it's like a blob of ice, and the sun hits it and then it scatters everywhere. And then there's other ice out there where it hits it and then it shows like this really cute little rainbow. So anyways, behavior of light, all different. Absorption. You remember the whole apple thing I was talking about?
Mm-hmm.
For light is consumed by those dark colors and nothing is seen outside of that. There is a paint, and I want to get an Aston Martin with this color paint on it, where it sucks all the color out of what's around it. And it's beautiful, but it's very, very black.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, your mind kind of gets tripped out because there's no, kind of like how cats use their whiskers to determine where they're at in a room or where they're at in a hole. We use shadows and sounds to determine where we're at in a room. We're not in holes, but you get my point.
Yeah.
So when our eyeballs look at this paint, it gets tripped out because we can't determine the corners of a room or like the edges of the car. So the car just looks like this blurry blob. It's really fun. Totally a nerd thing.
Really crazy. I didn't even know about that.
Yeah. So anyways, that is our 5 properties that we need to understand is possible before we start talking about measuring light. Does all of those make sense? And do you want me to go over any of them again?
Nope, those make sense.
Cool. Okay. One last thing before we get into which I don't know if we'll have time for, but hopefully we will. If not, there's great resources for you available, which I'll mention. One thing before we get into the units of measure is the speed of light. The reason why I want to talk about the speed of light is because many of us think the speed of light is some distant thing that only NASA deals with.
Yeah.
And yes, NASA deals with light a lot, but we see light and the speed of light all the time. It's all around us.
Right.
But here's my point I want to make about the speed of light. Yes, it's 186,000-ish miles per hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we go outside and we look at the sun, we're actually seeing the sun delayed from where it actually is.
Right.
Because the light that's coming from the sun has to travel a square word length of ways to get to our eyeballs, right?
Yes.
So that, I don't remember how many miles it is from the Earth to the sun, but if we applied math and put the equation of how miles per hour it takes for the speed of light, the light of the sun, it's roughly like an 8-minute delay. So when we look out to the sun, we're seeing it about 8 minutes in the past from where it actually is.
Interesting.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. That's really weird.
That's so cool to me.
Think about.
And when we apply inverse square law to the sun, It makes a crap ton of sense.
Yeah.
So when we think about that and we think about applying how light moves with how sound moves, it's very similar. You know, if I have a crow, to me is very loud, and with all of these barns and silos around me, if a crow or a pigeon does their thing, I can hear it. And I can usually triangulate exactly where that crow is. And I have a general sense, without doing math, how far away it is from me, because of the frequency, wavelength, and amplitude of the sound coming from that crow's mouth is traveling to my ear hole, how it's changing and how inverse square law makes that difference. If I walk closer to it, I obviously know that I'm getting closer to the crow, right? If I walk further away and I hear less of the crow, then I'm essentially hearing less of, or I'm further away from it. I know you want to talk about units of measure, and I'm running out of time because I have a hard stop too, but
yeah, no, it's okay.
I do want to talk, I want to give as much general information, and I'll send you my notes on this so that you have it. So you mentioned candela to me, and you're like, what the royal F is candela? Well,
yeah, that's what it, and what's the one that's a foot
candle? I know it's not how much light is dispersing on your foot. I know it sounds like that, but it's not that. It's like, you know, you take your foot and put a candle next to it. No, that's not it.
Okay.
So let me break those down for you for a little bit, and then we'll sign off. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
So a candela is a base unit of luminous intensity.
Okay.
So let's break that whole sentence down. Base unit means that it is the known descriptive unit of measure for a thing. That's what base unit means, right? So we don't even care what the thing is. We just know that that is the absolute purest form of that unit. Now we come over to the word luminous. Luminous definition is the emitting of light.
Yes.
So light emission. Like if I look at a headlight and it was shining, what I would see. And then intensity is how intense that is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if luminous means emitting of light, and then there's this base unit, it means that per long ago, there were no light bulbs and there was candles. So the old dudes described a base unit of light emitting as one candela, one candle.
Okay.
The la part is probably something languagey, but the point is it's a base unit of luminous intensity of a single candle.
Got it.
And I just finished watching Game of Thrones, and there were so many candles in that series. I was super impressed with the props master.
That like nothing caught on fire.
That nothing caught on fire, but then I can't not try to calculate inverse square law all around, you know, the cinematography of that show where they're doing a close-up of Jon Snow with 50 candles around his face. Like, how is he not blown out? How is his color temperature not different?
How is it not like super washed out looking? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was nerding out the whole time, but if you think about old time candles, smart guys standardized as whatever a single candle was, and when lit, how much light emitted from that. And so we just have to trust that emission from a single flame is a candela, one unit called candela. Does that make sense?
Yes. So when you're saying something is however many candelas, that's however many old-timey candles it would take to give the same amount of light emission.
Yep.
Cool.
Same
with you.
Same goes for cars. Remember back in the day we had horses? Well, nowadays we hear things on cars of like 150 horsepower or whatever. Yep.
Yeah.
1 horsepower is an element of power that we use to calculate. You got it.
Oh. I never thought that was literal. Huh.
Oh, it is. whoever it was that measured, old smart dude back in Cars land, probably Henry Ford knew him.
Yeah.
Measured how much a standard horse ran,
Yeah.
and that's how they started measuring the horsepower of cars.
Wow, that is the way some people's brains work.
I know, it's fascinating. That's why I love talking to people. It's like so glad there's not a bunch of me running around, because we'd all be bored out of my mind.
Yeah.
Okay, one last thought.
Okay, perfect.
What is my thing? Oh yeah, okay, wait. I forget. I'm too excited. Okay, focus. When you get into the things of measurements like lux and foot candle, and lumens and all that, remember there's imperial and there's metric. So
yeah,
metric is lux, US
Yep.
is foot candle.
Yep.
And then nit is metric and
Yeah.
US is foot Lambert. And stay tuned because I have to go.
Okay. That's okay.
I'll send you my notes.
Okay.
Send you my notes on lumens and incident and reflective measuring, and hopefully that will unlock the mystery a little bit for you.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and talking to me. It was really helpful and really fun. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Chrissy.
Cool.
All
You're
right.
welcome. I'll catch you later, girl.
All right. Sounds good. Bye.
Study with Steph, 'cause she's the best. She's gonna